There are engines so dominant that racing organizations banned them not because they broke rules, but because they made competition impossible. GM built 5 engines that were so far ahead of everything else on track that sanctioning bodies rewrote the rulebooks specifically to eliminate them. These weren't illegal engines. They were legal engines that racing couldn't tolerate because they exposed how far behind everyone else actually was. Here are 5 GM engines that got banned because they were too good. Why each one destroyed the competition so completely that rule changes became necessary, and what it reveals about racing's relationship with actual innovation. GM showed up to Daytona in 1963 with an engine nobody had seen before. They called it the Mark II. NASCAR drivers called it the mystery motor because Chevrolet refused to explain what it was or how it worked. The engine made 550 horsepower when Ford's best engines made 425. Junior Johnson and Johnny Rutherford qualified at speeds that shouldn't have been possible. Here's what made it unstoppable. The mystery motor was a 427 cubic inch V8 with porcupine-style valve arrangement that allowed massive airflow. The intake and exhaust valves were canted at different angles instead of parallel like every other engine. This meant the valves could be larger without interfering with each other. More air equals more power. Physics doesn't care about fairness. But here's the problem for NASCAR. The mystery motor wasn't in any production car. NASCAR's rules technically required engines to be available to the public. Chevrolet planned to put it in production later that year, but it wasn't available yet. NASCAR had a choice. Let Chevrolet run an engine that was 125 horsepower ahead of everyone else, or ban it and maintain competitive balance. NASCAR chose competitive balance. They announced that any engine not currently in production couldn't race. The mystery motor won one race at Daytona and was immediately disqualified from the rest of the season. Junior Johnson, who dominated that race, called it the most powerful engine he'd ever driven. He never got to race it again. But here's what reveals NASCAR's real motivation. The production rule wasn't consistently enforced. Ford and Chrysler ran special engines that weren't exactly stock either. The difference was their engines were close enough to the competition that races stayed interesting. Chevrolet's engine was so far ahead that it would have turned NASCAR into a Chevrolet parade. That's bad for ticket sales. The mystery motor eventually became the Mark IV big block that powered Corvettes and Camaros. By then, NASCAR had rewritten rules to limit cubic inches and airflow. The engine that was too dominant for racing became a legendary street engine instead. GM took the lesson. Don't bring something so good that the sanctioning body has to ban it to save the sport. In 1969, Chevrolet offered an all-aluminum 427 cubic inch engine as a factory option on the Camaro. Only 69 were ever built. The engine weighed 500 pounds versus 680 pounds for the iron block version. That's 180 pounds of weight savings directly over the front axle. In drag racing, weight distribution is everything. Here's why this engine broke drag racing. The ZL1 made 430 horsepower stock, but that number was a lie. Chevrolet dramatically understated the power to keep insurance rates manageable. Actual dyno testing showed 550,580 horsepower. Combined with the weight savings, ZL1 Camaros were running quarter-mile times that shouldn't have been possible for street cars. The NHRA had classified Camaros in stock eliminator based on the advertised 430 horsepower. This put ZL1 SID in the same class as cars, making actual 430 horsepower with iron blocks weighing 180 pounds more. It wasn't close. ZL1 Camaros won every race they entered. Fred Gibbs' dealership in Illinois bought 50 of the 69 ZL1 set built specifically for racing. They dominated so completely that other manufacturers stopped showing up. But here's what forced the NHRA's hand. In 1969, a ZL1 Camaro won stock eliminator at the U.S. Nationals and ran times faster than cars in the next class up, with 100 more horsepower. The car wasn't in the right class. It was in the class where Chevrolet said it should be. But reality didn't match the paperwork. The NHRA responded by creating a new rule. Factory horsepower ratings could be challenged and retested. If the NHRA found a car was significantly more powerful than advertised, they could move it to a higher class. The ZL1 was immediately retested, found to make 550 horsepower, and moved to a class where it competed against purpose-built race cars. It stopped winning. But here's the deeper issue. Chevrolet wasn't cheating. They offered the ZL1 as a factory option. You could walk into a dealership and buy one. The problem was that nobody except drag racers actually bought them. At $7,200 for the engine alone, the ZL1 cost more than most complete cars. Only 69 were built because only drag racers wanted them. The NHRA effectively banned the engine by reclassifying it out of stock classes where it competed with actual street cars. The 1970 Chevelle SS 454 LS6 was the most powerful muscle car ever sold to the public. The engine made 450 horsepower and 500 pound-feet of torque. This wasn't marketing. This was actual dyno-tested power. Chevrolet built it specifically to homologate the engine for NASCAR, which required 500 production examples. They built thousands. Here's what made the LS6 untouchable. It was a 454 cubic inch big block with high compression heads, solid lifter camshaft, and aluminum intake manifold. It made 450 horsepower. In NASCAR trim with race headers, carburetors, and tuning, it made over 600 horsepower. No other manufacturer had a production engine that could touch it. But here's the problem for NASCAR competition. Chevrolet showed up to Daytona in 1970 with LS6-powered cars that immediately set qualifying records. They were 5 miles per hour faster than anything Ford or Chrysler brought. In NASCAR, 5 miles per hour is an eternity. The race wasn't even close. Chevrolet dominated from start to finish. NASCAR's response was immediate. For the 1971 season, they limited all engines to 430 cubic inches maximum. The LS6 at 454 cubic inches was illegal. Chrysler's 426 Hemi was fine. Ford's 429 was fine. Chevrolet's 454 was too big. The rule change was obviously targeted at eliminating the LS6 specifically. But here's what makes this ban revealing. The cubic inch limit wasn't about safety or technology. It was about maintaining manufacturer parity. Ford and Chrysler couldn't compete with the LS6. So NASCAR changed the rules to eliminate it. This wasn't about the engine breaking rules. The engine forced NASCAR to create new rules to stop it. Chevrolet responded by destroying the LS6. They reduced compression, changed the camshaft, and detuned it to meet new emissions regulations for the 1971 model year. The 1970 LS6 remains the most powerful muscle car engine ever sold. It lasted 1 year before racing regulations and emissions laws killed it. The engine was too good for the era it was built in. In 1988, Lotus and Chevrolet developed a twin-turbo V8 engine for IndyCar racing that made over 800 horsepower. This was 150 horsepower, more than anything else on the grid. The engine used Chevrolet's Indy V8 architecture with Lotus-designed twin turbochargers and advanced electronics. It was completely legal under kart rules. It was also completely dominant. Here's why this engine changed everything. Previous IndyCar engines used single turbochargers that created lag and difficult power delivery. The Lotus Chevrolet used twin turbos with one feeding each cylinder bank. This eliminated lag, created linear power delivery, and made 800 horsepower that drivers could actually use. Other engines made peak power. This engine made usable power everywhere. But here's what made it unbeatable. Alan Sir Jr. won the 1990 CR Championship with the Lotus Chevrolet. The next year, Michael Andretti won. The engine won races by margins that shouldn't happen in spec racing. Kart was supposed to be about driver skill. The Lotus Chevrolet turned it into an equipment race. Teams with this engine won. Teams without it lost. Kart's response was technical. In 1991, they limited turbo boost pressure to reduce horsepower. This affected all engines, but it specifically targeted the Lotus Chevrolet's advantage. Then, in 1992, Kart introduced a pop-off valve that limited maximum boost pressure electronically. The valve was set to activate at boost levels where the Lotus Chevrolet made peak power. Other engines didn't reach those boost levels, so they weren't affected. But here's the brilliant part of the ban. Kart didn't specifically outlaw the Lotus Chevrolet. They just changed technical regulations in ways that eliminated its advantages. The twin-turbo design stopped being beneficial when boost was limited. The advanced electronics became irrelevant when pop-off valves controlled boost mechanically. The engine was still legal. It just wasn't better anymore. Chevrolet and Lotus stopped developing it. By 1993, the engine was obsolete, not because it was bad, but because rule changes had eliminated everything that made it good. This is how modern racing bans work. Don't outlaw the engine. Change the rules until the engine's advantages disappear. Cadillac entered sports car racing with a heavily modified Northstar V8 in LMP 900 prototype cars. By 2002, the engine had been developed to make over 650 horsepower while being significantly more reliable than competitor engines. Cadillac won races, then they won championships. IMSA had a problem. Here's what made the Northstar unbeatable, which meant Cadillac had decades of development data. Competitors were running purpose-built race engines with less real-world testing. The Northstar had production car reliability with race car performance. It could run 24-hour races without failures while making competitive power. But here's the specific advantage. The Northstar used dual overhead cams and 4 valves per cylinder when many competitors still used 2-valve pushrod designs. This meant better breathing, higher RPM capability, and more power from less displacement. Cadillac's 4.0-liter V8 made more power than competitors' 5.0-liter engines. Less displacement meant less weight and better handling. The 2002 season was the breaking point. Cadillac won 6 races. The championship wasn't close. Other manufacturers complained that Cadillac's production-based engine had unfair advantages because GM could leverage decades of Northstar development. They weren't wrong. Cadillac was using production car technology against purpose-built race engines and winning. IMSA's response was immediate for 2003. They implemented balance of performance rules that gave different engines different restrictor plates based on how fast they were. Cadillac's Northstar got the smallest restrictor, which limited airflow and reduced horsepower. Competitor engines got larger restrictors, which maintained their power. IMSA literally handicapped the Northstar to create parity. But here's what balance of performance actually means. It means the sanctioning body will artificially slow down whatever engine is winning. The Northstar wasn't illegal. It was too fast. So IMSA made it slower until racing was competitive again. This isn't about rules. This is about entertainment. A dominant engine makes boring racing. Boring racing sells fewer tickets. Cadillac continued racing with the neutered Northstar until 2004, then left sports car racing entirely. They proved their engine was superior. IMSA responded by making it artificially inferior. There was no point continuing when the sanctioning body would always adjust rules to prevent dominance. What these bans reveal about racing and innovation. Here's the pattern that emerges from all 5 engines. GM built something genuinely better than the competition. Racing organizations responded by banning it or handicapping it. The reason was never safety. The reason was never technical illegality. The reason was always competitive balance. The 1963 Mystery Motor wasn't illegal. It was just too powerful. NASCAR banned it to keep Ford and Chrysler competitive. The 1969 ZL1 wasn't illegal. It was just underrated. NHRA reclassified it so it couldn't dominate stock classes. The 1970 LS6 wasn't illegal. It was just bigger. NASCAR reduced cubic inch limits to eliminate Chevrolet's advantage. The 1988 Lotus Chevrolet wasn't illegal. It was just better engineered. CART changed boost rules to eliminate its advantages. The 2002 Northstar wasn't illegal. It was just more developed. But here's the fundamental truth about racing. Sanctioning bodies don't want innovation. They want parity. Close racing sells tickets. Dominant performance doesn't. When one manufacturer builds something significantly better than competitors, racing organizations have two choices. Let that manufacturer win everything, or change the rules to restore parity. They always choose parity, because racing is entertainment before it's competition. If fans know who's going to win before the race starts, they don't show up. If manufacturers know their innovations will be banned the moment they work too well, they stop innovating. This is why modern racing has become spec series where everyone runs identical equipment. But here's what these 5 engines prove. When GM was allowed to actually engineer without artificial restrictions, they built engines that competitors couldn't match. The ZL1 with its aluminum construction, the LS6 with its displacement advantage, the Lotus Chevrolet with its twin turbos, the Northstar with its production car development advantage. Every single one got banned or handicapped, not for breaking rules, but for being too good. That's the real lesson. Innovation in racing is only welcome when it doesn't work too well. The moment it creates an unfair advantage, the sanctioning body eliminates it to protect competitive balance. GM stopped building engines that were immediately banned because there was no point. If you build something too good, they'll just ban it anyway. Better to build something good enough to be competitive without being so good that it forces rule changes. That's the sad reality of modern racing. The most innovative engines don't win. They get banned. The engines that win are the ones that are good, but not too good. These 5 engines represent what happens when engineering is allowed to run ahead of politics. They were all immediately banned because they exposed the gap between GM's capabilities and everyone else's. Racing couldn't tolerate that gap, so they eliminated it through rule changes instead of letting competition determine outcomes. That's not racing. That's artificially manufactured parity for entertainment purposes. But it sells tickets, so it continues.